The other thing is coming down to so who is the person that you see people that way? Is there you want to actually say that's oh, yeah, that's the other thing is in terms of your relationship with the child, the wishing has been something at least tomorrow, maybe the future, we start to think about something together.
Just a second. All right. Let's rock and roll. Join. Crank the music once and crank the music once. It's very powerful. Empty emptiness from discrimination, composition, practice, and consciousness. Emptiness without boundaries. And it's not without standing, no vision, no fulfillment. No eye, no ear. You know, there is no conflict in silence with you to consciousness and no extinction for humans in silence to similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation. There is no accepted wisdom, no saying, showing picture that the still and suffers relying on action. The mind without obscuration, everything must be when Buddhism dwells 3 times less than manifestly completely awakened to answer complete enlightenment in reliance on meditation and wisdom. Therefore, the mantra perfection of wisdom is the mantra of declaring. The mantra equal to the mind authority as it also suffering is a truth seems false. Immortal reflection and so shall picture the Bodhisattva and should train from concentration and then Sattva. Let's say we should practice the perfection even those practice choice. The Bhagavan and the spoken and not separate. Those who are taught to or Bhagavan.
By your powers of and may they be auspicious.
Sangye Chela Sangye Chanala Chancho Bado Dani Kasunji Dani Chishiki Betsamandi Yolam Enche Sangye Yogavashu Sangye Chela Sangye Chanala Chancho Bado Dani Kasunji Dani Chishiki Betsamandi Yolam Enche Sangye Yogavashu Sangye Chöden Tsultrim Chonala Chancho Bade Dhammi Kyasin Dagi Chushe Giben Tonum Gi Rola Penche Sangye Yobarashu Hangi Tulzini Zuni Tawa Dunji Pambi Chele Pambi Chun Penzi Padam Chela Chante Good morning, everyone. Just
Can't hear you. Oh, yeah. Sorry. You got out of practice, isn't it? Yeah.
Samalaya, I mean, that BSP. Some negative choices and cheeky like cutting like negative sense.
So thank you very much, everyone. We have concluded the study of the BSP very well. Thank you very much, Tricky, for Geshe is just pulling your leg. Yeah, pulling your knee.
You were to nobody Sigma 10 is like Sigma 10 Tangomadi and BSP that one jam the young so any community change yeah, could you use
Of course, Geshe is only joking. Chugla got a little bit confused and she did a recitation of the Thanksgiving mandala. And Geshe said, it doesn't actually matter that much if you think of making a mandala offerings with the motivation of thinking of requesting the teachings and taking up, participating in the BSP activities. It's all fine.
if that hanging on to the Lord did go down with it, name mark something mark and changing the Dumba Tasus Ketishas. In the Denim Niba Sumbalia, carrying the Kadini Sonju Cholan, Tangro sister and the Nikichomas in Moliana, like the BSP in the ring and Tangros.
Not too much.
The
So we are going to pick up from the point that we left off last year. So last year we have looked at Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva of Life, and we reached the 7th chapter. So we're getting closer to the end of the 7th chapter, and this is what we're going to begin with today, concluding covering the 7th chapter and moving forward. So it's the first session of the BP program for this year, and Geshe asked for the BSP schedule in general, the dates of the module for this year, so we can send it to him later on.
Teresa, cousin, Tamonja, cousinima, Manzota, Junju, Bodinza, Geshe, heavy Usra, and Anzo Kazinta, some Ranama, Shuja Women Usra.
So anyway, many of you are up to date where we left off in our previous session. That was last year, I think, towards the end of November. So let's pick up on the point that we left off previously.
That's all you should go, Madam. Sally, Junju, live and gain and drag, going and drag, and Chushavan and drag, so the Mandan and the Chanju Sanjo Rumbuchi, and Magiva Kiva, never Kong pay each other. That's sure someone's up. The countries Magiva gave a country do, give a never country do, never someone's Kong, and touch my country doing that. Teaching which is so yours, and a new till shell channel, new the conditions that Gashi, German that
So we are studying Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva of Life, consisting of a few chapters. So the different ways of delineating the chapters, 8 or 9 or 10 chapters. But anyway, as we said before, when we look at the summation of the meaning of Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, it is summarized, the meaning of the text is summarized into the one verse prayer that says, may the precious man of enlightenment, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase more and more. And this is what we're looking at. The way to give rise to bodhicitta, the way to maintain bodhicitta, prevent it from falling into decline, and the way to increase it more and more. Yeah. Jesus, you look a bit red-faced today. Is everything all right, or is it just you're hot, the heat? Tired?
Oh, there is that these are the some Gavitop says, some correct direction that Gavitop nominally deva, Gaval Deva Shavatan, Jebu Yilachi, Geotribatan, Gavitop the Solos, Humble nominally Gaval and Devani, and seven semi dentin Devatan, beach and Lekan, let the land, change it, let the moon gauchas.
So as we're looking at the 7th chapter that explains the way to develop joy effort or enthusiasm. As we said before, it is teaching how to delight in virtue. We looked at the forces which are incompatible with developing joy effort, and now we're looking at the 4 powers which we use in order to develop joy effort. Of the 4 powers, we covered 2, and today we're going to pick up from the 3rd power, which is the power of joy. Let's look at the outline. Sorry. All right, the outline for this section. So we looked at the power of esteem, the power of stability. Today we're going to pick up from the power of joy, consisting of 3 points: making perseverance in virtue without considering the fully ripened effect, accomplishing virtue by mentally engaging the effect, and the way to apply oneself with the power of joy. Let's begin with verse 63 that comes under the heading of making perseverance in virtue without considering the fully ripened effect. So looking at verse 63, it says, just like desiring the resultant happiness of play, whatever the engaged activity is, hold on to these actions like them without satisfaction.
Teresa, Sajid, the Gavit of Islam, Gavit of the Yavana, Gavadan, Tro Yavana, and Le Karla, Juvia, Le Telia, and Jutuya, and touching to yet. And Dota Shuyeros, Inzada, and Charanzo, Yangin Solaya, Gavit of Yavati, Geshe, Troshingan, Yavati. Geshe Japanda, Rivers, Yakushut, the Chajan, Kiyomaros. The Shanging Winnie, Tanzan, the Tamons and Yangadostra, and it Shanging, Junior, the Chet on the Traversa, Tanzania, Gaoyomo, the Soso Gao in Jimmy, Gao Jet to it, Tolia, Penangadina, so Gao Jet to Tolia, Bezuchi, it's done. Gao Yungus, Kansan Suzu, Jan, Kang Jambati, one the Chinese and Kanchimi Manu Motive, and Suzu Wini, and Jambaina, and Dindig Pasuchi, share Kokoviavati, the master of Tangimasan and Kokovia Shira Sansonki, Gawadanga Jazayana Yesra.
So as we're looking at the power of joy, which is about developing enthusiasm, delighting in virtue, it is important for, first of all, initiating virtuous activities. So in order to initiate virtuous activity, you need to be delighted in those activities. You need to be enthused about such activities. But not only that, you also need to, in order to engage with those activities and to continue with them, all right. In order to also engage with those activities and to continue to perform them, we need joyous effort. We need to delight in virtue. So then, looking at our situation here, the students that are here, Geshe reckons that since no one forces you to do that, it's not that kind of, it's not that you need to kind of to struggle into getting into the sessions. It is likely that you do it from the very outset with joyous effort. So you delight in that virtue. From the point of view of those who teach the Dhamma, those who translate, here it's kind of could be slightly more tricky in the sense that, those activities that we need to perform. And yet Geshe says that sometimes, when you have certain duties that you need to perform, you still need to make sure that you do it with joyous effort. So at least Geshe says that from his point of view, the way that he thinks about it is that he studied for quite a long time in his monastery. And here is an opportunity for sharing the knowledge that he has with others. In that sense, it is the best opportunity, the best way of sharing his knowledge with others, whatever he studied. So therefore, this is something that he continuously or regularly tries to think of in order to develop or to sustain joyous effort.
Sajid Hamdali, nominal meeting, Kevalam Bebasa. Ani Jasju showed the song John Julia, and some chair, Tile Hagachik, and it gave a Bebachik, Tile Hagachik, Yomaris, Kanji Chanju Samdi, and it have a chimney with chew that big that mean that with Chavinza, Jonshin Ninza, that Tile Hagachik, Churchajik, Yomaras, have a chimney chill of heart. Inza, that and indeed gave a baby come to the yard. Namilla Mare was said. Namilla Mare said, so the any thumb handle sober down. Tigora, but indeed Mindala sober down. And the auntie may change you to nature, and it peeing Militian, that's it. So means so and so that means Namdos indeed, damaged indeed, yeah. So the 아니 잔주 쌤 던지시오는 잔주 쌤이 마기를 깨봐 내가 공을 배야지도 준주 점을 연습 제거상 그건 디고 그랬어.
So in that sense, when we look at the subject matter of Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, there is no better virtue that you can create through studying and contemplating this manuscript that was composed by Shantideva, which focuses on the mind of enlightenment, which is the heart of the Mahayana Dhamma. It is the heart, it is the main pillar of the Mahayana Dhamma. And as such, we make effort in the virtue of the mind of enlightenment without, as the outline for this section says, without considering the fully ripened effect. So we develop enthusiasm about the virtue of the mind of enlightenment and its branches without giving a consideration to the fully ripened effect, in a sense that here we understand it as without thinking that I'm going to do that in order to have a good reputation, in order to make a good name for oneself. If I study this text well, if I think about it well, in the future, I will be able to teach it to others and thereby make a good name for myself. So this is not the type of consideration for the effect that we have when we take up the study and the teachings of Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life. And that's what we are aiming at, is just as we said, using the verse that we've quoted at the beginning, we're doing that in order to generate the mind of enlightenment if it hasn't been generated yet. We do that in order to prevent the mind of enlightenment from falling into decline and to make it grow stronger and stronger, to increase it more and more.
아니 개발이야 아니 조신 가시 조신 배바디 배 간다지 고르스 라웬스 안 자වෙ나 단디에디 아니 제거 진중 아니 잼미 된된되었다 디 제거 내가이 내들라는 세제디 내들면 가와차스 라 제거 진중 아니 비기기다 잼무제를 가와여라스 이 가시 조신 노니베 아니 뒤쪽으로 감도 못 보여 칼라 라마라 사이드 비도로 톨란드로마 인디상 제메베 제모 코로나야지 가능하니 아니 균다와 신기 먼저 있느냐 내 난신기베 아니 전주스는 내들이야 주치니 아니 뭔가지 와 싸우니까 몸 매버지 왔어 어디니 시고레스.
And Shantideva here provides an analogy for explaining the type of attitude that we develop when we take up the development of the mind of enlightenment. So it says, just like those who desire the pleasure of the pleasurable result of play, this Bodhisattva adheres to whatever task he may do. So just like a small child playing in the playground without paying attention to time, without thinking of food, without thinking of clothes, the clothing become dirty and so forth. The child finds themselves being completely engrossed with the pleasure of play. So do we, with an insatiable attitude, develop delight in the development of bodhicitta. So without thinking of the fully ripened effect, without giving consideration to the fully ripened effect, we completely delight in the development of bodhicitta.
네, 보고 제물라야 은지 가와나신기 난조 아니지 전주쌤 줘봐 조 전주쌤 이다 저지 전주래야 주거래야 원데 담이게 됐지 보고 제물라 가와나신지 안 대한지 아니 디 카드라야지 이 아니 뒤처리 아니 사양 통해서 써봐야 아니 가서 같이 샘 셴바메바 아니 제모 코로니아와 만신기 아니 전주래야 주고 가지고야지 아니 세디기 아니 또그 땅속에 아니 딘지래야 아니 마차바 마레바 오늘 장이게 아니 전주 샘을 그게 상승 이 코로 되는 얘기 아니 주고야지 그 딘지지가 봐이나 딘지지가 봐나 딱 가위도 세 전주 냠수면발이야 가비도 세티 생이 되면 차고서 그랬어.
So using the analogy here for being so attracted to the pleasure derived from playing, this is the type of pleasure that we take up when we develop the conduct of the mind of enlightenment, like a child in the playground, without giving a consideration for time or food or clothing and so forth. A child is completely attached to the pleasure that comes of playing or playing with toys and so forth. Similarly, our mind becomes insatiable with respect to the joy that comes from the development of bodhicitta. Without adhering or without becoming attached to food and clothing and social interactions and fame and reputation and so forth, the only thing that we take joy in is the development of bodhicitta. And this is the power that is emphasized here when we develop the power of joy. Joy that is insatiable joy in the practice of bodhicitta.
그래서 다 제외 나오면 내가 지금서 제가 가지 셈이 되는 제분 더다 전주 셈반 비 신분 제분 내 칸인데 내 퇴섬당 전주 셈 공부가 소비 내들은 셈바티 조와신도 자디 내들 몸음시 비용만체가 차원되게 가와자오스.
So let's look at the commentary through this section. It says, just like children desire the resultant happiness of play, so should bodhisattvas have joy and grasp at their actions for the purpose of others, such as listening, contemplating, and meditating on bodhicitta. One should be so joyful that one desires the actions continually without being satiated by them.
Devil penata anju lojong digri chevaina di chebi ani ledi devil gawa khabarche ra ani randa sing ten tamje duktu tamji ki kompampi ani thobu yabata ani thobat sawni neba ani tetsun sawni neba a dimji chi yimbainza ani tela samtanchi anju givi ledelia jugo pris ra.
Then the second section explains accomplishing virtue by keeping the result in mind. So considering the result of virtue's activity, particularly here, the result of the virtue activity of training in bodhicitta, we develop a mind that completely delights in the virtue of bodhicitta, that causes us to continue engage in the practice of bodhicitta.
Zavinamaya, Devi Kundu Lechigan, Dengur Mingur Tome Kisati, Pereshas, Penan Jigdembanam, Jigdembanam, that's Sonjani by the Singatami, Karimbaina Kunsuge, Devupi Lotore, and it's song with Kevin to so. Yungu Yoga, Jacob Yamaras, Tetsum the Chigo de Inaya, Kunzu Telia, and it's Bezun Femin Chetu Yavaina. And Nansu and then led the chin, Tartu Jebu Yavadi, Yacha Yadamayana, Telekan Jukwich, Chagduas, or Dindis or Dindi Pet in the Chagdus, can't then you are telemage to the days.
So the next verse, number 64, begins with saying, although people work in order to be happy, it is uncertain whether or not they will be happy. In a sense that when you look at that from the viewpoint of the world, worldly beings take up different jobs. You might be a farmer, you might be a business person. And when you're undertaking a certain task with a lot of effort, great effort, you do so without being absolutely certain that that will yield crops or benefit or business or what have you. So when you're a farmer and you work really hard in your field, there's no guarantee whatsoever that harvest will be produced. When you're a business person and you're with great effort engage in business, it's not that there's absolute guarantee that you will be successful, and yet you do not shy away from putting a lot of effort into your work. But here, when we're looking at bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, it is guaranteed that benefit will come from the virtue of bodhicitta. So even more so here, one should do that with great effort and also with great joyous effort that delights in that virtue, because the benefit of that is guaranteed.
내가 숨 두개정은 대든 쇼라.
Hmm.
아니 너 간사가 숨게 뉴스도 오는 거면 하고 같이 거들은 학과서 말했어. 그냥 이제 나tes 교스 아니 맞은 돈 상만 교스 러셔버렸어.
Tam gyöpsö drogomaro.
네, 그렇지 나는
Shoktan katsuna?
쇼당이들 쇼당 두개정은
Okay.
나니 숨게 뉴스도 됐어.
Now, in Geshe's book, there are 650 pages. Last year, we spent, I think, 28 weeks, maybe 28 weeks in studying Shandeva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, and we managed to cover only 326 pages. So, if you have in mind that this year, we have to push ahead and make sure that we cover everything, and for that end, we need to do it quickly. Well, if you maybe ask Geshe to do it, we can look it up, but also do we really need to push forward to cover things quickly? Yeah. So it seems that kind of Geshe is looking at the facial expression, and what do you guys reckon? Do we need to kind of push ahead and cover things quickly, or are we all right in covering in the pace stuff we covered it before? Or even you can say we can go slower. Sorry?
Slow and steady wins the race, they say.
Okay, slow and steady win the race. Right, dira naso talo sherab gilli o tago magas.
아래
Right, naso yema khala bresin
야야
the sherab liu matan khona dutta de the change.
야 딱딱 sorry nin deven anlalayan jigdeva nam solution devi tönde shinda sobe lecheja deep devan gömüyor to meche yigdi meche deva töbe meba meche chanju semba kangi neni negavdan tadu meba devan gyo tede ne meche cheder de tayu devan mujos.
We read through verse 64. Let's look at a commentary to this verse. Though worldly beings engage in actions such as field work in order to attain mental and physical happiness, it is uncertain whether the result will be happiness or not. Only the actions of bodhisattvas are certain to bring about temporary and ultimate happiness. And if one does not engage in these actions, then how could one attain the resultant happiness?
That perisha peti put socha danceta devanam dimum name della shiva sonum kita chidingums
Della koa matapado junjute na di retis.
koma
Le koa matompado. Yama so ko taba matopado junjute na di res.
the others is
Ole is saying, let's continue till samsara ends. Geshe said that that's a good attitude. Anyway, so looking at the next verse, it says, if I'm not satiated by desirable objects, which are like honey smeared upon a razor's edge, then why am I satiated by merit, which is ripening in pacification in happiness?
certainly
The Western Australia show. Oli. So Oli from Western Australia says that let's continue till samsara ends. Well, Geshe says that, now, having said that, don't just kind of fade away from Zoom sessions and stop studying. You have also to stick with that and continue with that with us until samsara ends.
There is that bit in my loss and God loss of dinner. Would just sort of have a dancing chin on the roaches, New Chichi to one water, to tell us of the one coaches, taking Mama, Nego Ginjabo. Nami Tadami want to travel to Dela, Tadu, the weapon she would devote you, Jinso Sonum Ki, that chitty, Mom, Momba Mego Combo Chavos.
It says in the commentary, sensory happiness of form, sounds, and so forth are like honey on a razor's edge. When tasted with one's tongue, then, although experiencing some taste, one experiences the suffering of being cut on the tongue. If one is not satiated by cyclic existence, no matter how much one is engaging in it, then how can one be I should have said, if one is not satisfied by cyclic existence, no matter how much one is engaging in it, then how can one be satisfied by the merit of generosity and so forth, which is the cause to attain the temporary happiness of higher rebirth of gods and humans, and the ultimate happiness where all suffering has been pacified. One should meditate on them insatiably.
Oh, did it? But then they Gavi Tobla Jerry said, Gavi Tobla, Kanji, Gavi Tobla George Lamanja, and Gavi Tobti, and hundreds key gurus.
Now, the next point under verse 66 is the way to apply oneself with the power of joy. So how do you apply to the power of joy? Another way of saying that, how do you generate joy?
Launching Tsultrim Tsultrim that led the lion Jubachas.
Verse 66 says, thus, in order to complete this task, I shall engage in it just as an elephant tormented at midway enters into a lake.
The big tone, that big tone, Sungo service, and Penas, Languchi, and Nimachidus Laundi, and Savi Pena, Chika Sungota, Chika Delia, and the Yagada, Africa Delay, the launching Chidogoras, and the Zutsawa Chivicoli, Chika Chivicoli, and Languchi. And it's how it's Kakong, that children didn't Tombaima, and so can't give any Kak Motuba, and Solon Jubaman Shingi, and Nansu, the same thing, and it's Lelore, and it's Karsota, and the Ranchin Zendan, Jan Yawatu, and the song of the Dilla Sobi. Shawan to Masomba, and Savi to launching Sonjan and Juba Manshingi, and Combo Chinto Tabu, and Chanju Sam Nelia, and Jugoris.
Again, this section employs an analogy of how we engage with the development of the Bodhichitta with joy, just like a herd of elephants is rushing towards a lake or towards a pond. During the scorching summer heat. So when you look at elephants in India or in Africa, particularly during the summertime, when the sun heat is scorching, if a herd of elephants is noticing a pond in the distance or a pool or a lake, you'll not be able to stop them. They will rush into that pool and plunge into it in order to alleviate the pain of that scorching heat. Similarly here, when we think of the type of joy that we take up in the manner of enlightenment, without being manipulated or controlled by the heat of laziness or self-cherishing attitude, we will take joy in the delight of developing bodhicitta, just like an elephant is plunging into a cold pool during the summer heat. This is the type of joy that we should develop, in that no one will be able to stop us from the development of bodhicitta.
일단 변다 지당 소자 담을 베기 따지 카공을 베 아니 춘통선이야 아니 라오메가 주드랑이다 요르데이네 수칸 까무도 중이다 나무치 잠은 서버스 소차 신수간 따지 똑치시 란치 똑치시 프로차가자 아니 소차 신기 딱 까무도가 조투버 디난신기 MP 소수 가르려야 장거 변다는 쫀주 장거다 장시 쫀주려야 아니 주도 가와시 지가 봐야나 아니 요신 강기장 아니 가 마투바 될래야 주투레스 인지 가위 똑치.
So the analogy of being, for example, tormented by thirst and seeing a pool that provides you with drinking water, and kind of the only thing in your mind is wanting to reach that pool or reach that lake and satiate the pain of being thirsty, can be applied to many different types of animals, but at least in terms of those of big body, like for example, an elephant, you will not be able to stop an elephant from plunging into that pool and satiating the thirst. An elephant, you can say that it's like, has a massive body, also massive strength, and fourth, you will not be able to stop, to block that elephant and prevent them from drinking. Similarly, when we apply the meaning to the analogy here, when the joy that we develop in studying Shantadeva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, studying the practices of Bodhichitta, the power of joy should be such that no other mind would be able to prevent us from doing so. So no other mind that arises in our mind would be able to stop us from practicing bodhicitta. Just like you cannot stop an elephant taking pleasure or taking delight in plunging into a pool of water.
That's Lanchenta and Chanju Samley and Jubilee sense, and the chick any same she penat chick and it sing it that we touch Casota, the Shasla and Tixeros, and it sick that we will pay, and it ranchins that we will pay, and it share out to Samba, so can't be young, Kamutua, and Chanju Sam Gomala and Jutu. Pena language and sing it that thousand singers over country Namji Shinata with Sukanga come motive be any children and Jutu Amazi and Nanju Samlea, Chanju Samlea and Julia Gary Tobio Vino and Losian chick and Kanjishida to Kangian and Kamatuba Chanju Samlea and Julia Chikungus that is Gary Top said the kitchen.
You can use whatever analogies you might have at hand in order to understand that point. So whatever works for you is good. So then you can think of, for example, attachment, which is like a lion, a self-cherishing attitude, which is like a tiger, or other afflictive states of mind, being like a leopard. Even if they arise forcefully, still they cannot stop an elephant. They cannot overcome an elephant, which is the strongest animal. So similarly, when you develop joy in the mind of enlightenment, no other awareness, no other consciousness, not attachment, not anger, nor no attachment which is like a lion, anger which is like a tiger, and so forth, none of them would be able to stop the elephant of the mind of enlightenment that takes joy in taking joy in the development of bodhicitta.
어디를 두손시 다 되면 내 대답을 주고 싶어 대답에는 샘빌레 쌈바티 살 탈친 거 제일지 탈친 거 제일 살세 뭐이 있어 탈친 거 제일지 님만 체두스 사왔던 공부동 란치 소단 채나 조신 주 소를 주고다 샘빌레 텔라양 주고 자오스
In the commentary to verse 66, it says, because it is an action suitable to engage in, therefore, in order to complete the intended action, one should engage in it like an elephant tormented by noon by the heat and thirst that comes upon the lake and immerse itself joyfully in it.
어디래 다시더니 다 전주쌤 공부를 비리 지 딘지 가와침부 다 고르스 다 가와침부 돈 주고를 단 주 갑돌이야 가고래야 나는서 아니 비리 샘바디 비리 아니 전주쌤 공부를 지 가와요 바이니야 아니 지 류도 아니 마저가 딘지 용으로 왔어 난들도 있다 동안 그란신도 있자 아니 직갈에 가야요 탄체요 아니 니트래요 아니 직저고도요 다 가리나 탄체된 용거라서 딘지 까블이야 아니 다 가르치고레스 딘지 까블이야 가르치고레스 지와도 나마서 딘지 용거라서
Then in covering the last power, which is called the power of suspension or the power of relinquishment, it might be that mentally you feel joy about developing bodhicitta, and yet physically for the time being you will not be able to do it. And that we do say that our body is a body of suffering, and therefore it is still susceptible to difficulties, being tired, feeling sleepy, feeling hungry, and so forth. So the next section says what happens when mentally you feel joy, but physically there's something like hunger, thirst, difficulties, suffering, being tired, being sleepy, and so forth. What should you do in those occasions?
제가 더비 란진 솔을 주고 나서 란진 사회적인 가끔비 란진비 솔을 주고 나서인데 아니 수강 까모도 주고를 라운디 한 주고에나 한 까고래 양아도 게임만 붙이기도 왔어 갈래카했던 이유도 왔어 디컵도이 말이야 아니 강나 참아 아니 그 캐드스에서 동행치지는 그 아니 테마타도 주고를 라바이마스 아니 대든지 말했어요 대든지 말다스
So we spoke about the power of joy, which is like not being able to stop an elephant from plunging into or drinking from a pool of water during the scorching heat of the summertime. So the question is, what about then the practice of bodhicitta, where you take joy in bodhicitta, but still you have many adversities, many adverse conditions that come up? Should you completely disregard whatever adversities there are, whatever adverse conditions you encounter, and only invest in the development of bodhicitta? Here, Shantideva says, not quite so.
네, 디 가르레 왔습니다. 지바 돌을 떠보세요. 돌을 떠보니 레시 돌봤다. 엔 돌봤어. 디 아니 비 까불을 뜨시는가? 당한도 남주 탑다 셔러니가 거르세요. 아니 디 소지 차고도 까불을 뜨니 그냥 공항수 그 거기가 니가 공항수 거를 봐도 아니 만주치 아니 니마치 돈자치 나니 사마비기 탈친 투에지 여마로스 참 멘트니 아니 깨원 됐자마서 깨원 아니 로고연사 디기치 샘 마녀야다 아니 가와 마토리야 체도 아니 루그나수고에 딘디 융그레스 잠샤고야 간지 아니 리시 토로세야디 잠샤니 나수에치 아니 양고츠야 언더단 딘디직 수고레스라.
So here Shantideva explains the fourth power, the power of suspension, the power of relinquishment. And there are 2 points in that section, periodic suspension and total suspension. So we take up virtuous activities. Here it says that when you do become tired, you need to take a break. You do so in thinking that I need to sustain continuity to my practice, to my virtuous activities. Not only sustain continuity of my practice for this lifetime, but also to make sure that I would be able to maintain continuity of my practice from this lifetime to the next lifetime and the one after that, and through that to develop my mind. In order to maintain that continuity, we then keep in mind that it's not that if we push really hard, we're going to be able to accomplish everything in just a short span of time, within a week or so. Since we're not going to be able to attain everything just within a week or so, then we also need to know when to take a break and to get some rest. And this is what Shantideva is referring to here when he speaks about periodic suspension. When you do need to take a rest, when you feel tired, rather than pushing, take a break, so that you'll be able then to prevent your mind from becoming bored, from becoming deflated, from becoming tired, and in order to be able to sustain the continual joy in your practice. For that, you need sometimes to take a break.
Tadi Rishi Thor said, the Pilaya, one tiny gipena, and children use service namolaya, and to ship with Jim, Shiparalaya, and it's a sergeant here, and it's Chego Beer, and Charts here, and it's and it's Chanchu Senegovia, and it's Tomban Ugomia, and it's some day or so that indeed sitting in there. So, Kogo was a Naruto P. Dundrachik Namolaya, and Chuching Mrs. And there's Chiche, Tenepe Tanching this legend, Dawa Shaje, indeed sometimes Sonny Maris Raw.
So then when you think about it in terms of 24 hours, dividing it 24 hours to sets of 4 hours. So you can practice accumulations and purifications to frustrations, meditate on emptiness, meditate on bodhicitta, but also take a break. So this is what we do continuously. So if you think of a week, for example, in which 2 hours out of 1 week, you take up a virtuous practice, and after that you say, I'm too tired, I need to take a break from that. Of course, this is not the way to go.
Ganji, Gauranji didn't Sonsha, that some end of Chivu Cup, Gombru Chivu Cup, Chansen Kojong Chivatao, Kavaya, that's Tang Chivu Kavaya, Tamata Shagris, Tamata the Shachi, and Nansu Gugris, Tang Chenaya, Uzu Yang Chedavana, and Kanzajula bet any Chavadelia Jugruchi come to the Kenny, and there was only never to do any Chadre, Ningers, on the Letambo, Pena, and the Redos on the Penatachi, and the Kalados, and Susan, they were made it Kalaj, Magaj Kalaji, Uzu Yan, Mikin 7, Kanzajula Kala, Tom in the pay, which you mil and sons. But these were the sound in Chigio Maris.
Honest gave a practical advice for practice. He says that particularly when you're doing a retreat, when you're taking up a meditation practice, when you meditate on the states of bodhicitta and so forth, there are occasions in which you will feel tired. At a time that you feel tired, especially exactly at those times, take a break. If you push, if you persist, even at a time in which you feel tired, if you push, it might cause you to become disinclined to continue with that practice later. You might become uninspired with continuing with the practice if you try to push, particularly at a time in which you feel tired. It's just like, suppose that someone is giving you food that you don't like, and you're pushed to eating it. So if you, from the very outset, you don't like that food, but still you're forced to eat it, you're being pushed to eat it, it is likely that the reaction that you will develop is becoming nauseous next time that you see that food. So the same approach should be applied to practice, particularly for beginners. So know when to take a break, particularly when you feel tired, because if you are going to push with your practice when you're tired, it might cause you later on to lose interest, to become disinclined to continue with that practice. It says at the beginning of verse 67, when my strength is related to degeneration, I should leave whatever I'm doing in order to return to it.
Chanju sem ya namne chiganza chanju sem gombalaya and gavitobs the dinti gavitobdi and sem so sem la jawar sem la gadru yonaya and lu tancheni and lu tob nyam kabdulaya and temata pilaya and shani and nanso gogres but dindi dindi kogo das ra mato sem tob nyam yat and gawa meba chabana and changes juela to meba gawa meba chabana jago se diten matters.
When Shantideva says, when my strength is related to degeneration, which means that when my power declines, when my strength declines. The same word is used in Tibetan for power and strength. So you can also read that verse in saying that when my power declines. Now, here it doesn't refer to the power of joy. So you might take up the practice of Bodhichitta, meditate on Bodhichitta with joy in your mind. So your mind might be joyful, and yet physically you might get tired. So when your physical strength declines, this is when what Shantideva says, when your physical power declines, not your mental joy, but when your physical strength declines, this is time to take a break.
That girl and baby, and a girl and baby, listen termness, be that Samlaya, Gabrielaya, Sam Massiva Chabra Soba, Rap and Panche only, and the Sam Massiva, and in Trovina, and the Sam Sil never child, the new does, and Lu Tancheva, Tinji, it top Nyambatans, and Jesu Jana, Nansu de large Laber Chavi, turned the Rishi Torachas. Tortor said Zamshai, and in Nansuni, the Lu Nansu Sevaka young chick, and in Namian Sodajili and Juchin Deva Mayba, and Munton Jugoris, and Zambachawas.
The commentary says, if one is affected by one's weakening strength, who says physical strength, if one is physically and mentally exhausted by one's practice of virtue, one should relinquish it temporarily, than to start again when one is rested. So you take a break, you take a rest when you feel exhausted. But rather than sinking into a sense of distraction where you're being completely saturated by that sense of pleasure that you get out of distraction, as soon as you are rested, take it up again. Take your virtuous practice, take it up again.
Then you but 10 Torase, that's Yamni, ya, Judy, Hamangama, and Sambana, and Benaji, Tangamajila, and gives you a courage on Shogi Tambo, Benaji, Jamdusin get of Jingana, and Jamdusin, we will say, Tamni, and Taran, they did not go Mushikan and Leg Maras, and tea, say out of surgery, and finish hatching that, 공무원이야 죽고 그랬어.
Now, the next point in this section is referring to total suspension. Now, total suspension refers to the sequence of your practice. So, if your practice has certain steps, once you accomplish an earlier step, suspend it in the sense that leave it and move on to the next step. Like, for example, for those of you who have a daily practice where you begin a certain meditation practice in the morning, it begins with correcting your motivation in going for refuge and developing bodhicitta. And in order to do that, first off, you visualize the objects of refuge in front of you. Then you go for refuge. So when you have done that well, don't just stay in that situation or in that state, sorry. Set it aside and then move on to the next step in your practice. And this is what Shantideva mentions here. Total suspension refers to once you have well accomplished a certain step, suspend it in a sense, leave it, and then move on to the next step. So looking at the last two lines in verse 67, they say, if something is finished well, I shouldn't put it aside with a wish for more and more later.
레버스는 치마당 치문대비 대방자스, 대방자스. 안 제외는 연구는 레버스는 내 치마다 치마대 내신듯이 차원 대비 아니 선바디 방벌자다 아니 간지 아니 그 찌간에 대대마이 버 찌간에 찌자와는 톨톨드려져서 어딘지 된다든지랬어.
As the commentary says, if an action is completed well, then one relinquishes it because one wants to repeat that action again and again, right? So as we said, if you go through a certain sequence in your practice and each one of the steps is accomplished well, then when it is accomplished, leave it or put it aside and then do the next step or take the next step. In that sense, we can build on your practice so that you can do it later on again and again.
다든들이다 니바스 tempada 시신지 저번 냠수 랑원 흐르차와나 바위를 흐르차와다 tempada 시신 흐르차와 제시이 니미갑 메와다 니바초와 테마타 도버차와다 리벨레라 메버차와스.
Now, the next section in chapter number 7 is devoting oneself to the practice of the conduct by means of mindfulness and introspection, consisting of 5 points. Devoting oneself to conscientiousness, devoting oneself to mindfulness and introspection, not distinguishing a time of wrongdoing from mindfulness and introspection. One should overcome wrongdoing as soon as it arises, and one should make perseverance in reasonable activities.
그다 아니 바위를 낸 거였어요. 바위가 세디 필이야 간지 장종된 거지. 그러 아니 장종된 거지 지고 그랬어.
장종선?
장부체. 그러
총선은 중보. When the first point says that you devote yourself to conscientiousness, what it means is that you need to be smart about the way to practice. You need to be wise. You need to be smart.
다들이 100을 토니다 장종된 거 지고를 했으라면 아니 자외나오야 타니 자다 인지도 유무 라칼하고시 유무 전에 술사시 유무 다는 지버딱 지버때 어디에 라.
So how do you become smart about your practice? Let's look at verse 68. Just as a seasoned soldier engages in a fencing battle with the enemy, so shall I avoid the weapons of the afflictions and attack the enemies that are the afflictions.
그러다 저단 되는 게 아니 탑이 봤으나 배나 아니 탑 탐진 진행 조디 배나 마음이 왔어. 그러 아니 마음이 봤어야 마음이 봤어야 같이 양용당 장동 상황 내려와서 아니 지 잘 타기 거야. 지 잘파 아니 지 그 잘파 지 맨다 슈게 다시 뭐세 지고 많이 봐. 아니 전 내봐이나 소소라 마키와 지야기 아니 이쪽진 아니 탑니 니쪽 돈 조그레스 배나.
So here the analogy that is used is fighting an enemy. So you have a certain enemy and you're going to combat with that enemy. And that enemy is a seasoned soldier in a sense that they have an experience on the battlefield and also they're smart or expert in the art of war. So you need to take a two-pronged approach to fighting that enemy. First of all, you need to be skilled in where to hit that enemy. For example, if you're shooting an arrow, then you need to know where to hit. But also at the same time, you need to have a self-defense approach, right? You need to protect yourself from the enemy attacking you.
그래다지 파슈토 장기 파슈에 찍고 돌아 상당자만 수슈디기 지 소리야다 까야 돌아야 지 바요 마치바나 한 소소래야 냥가 튀기로스 디난신기 남주지 아니 베나다 제소 파신 주고 냠내는 주고 갑들이야 라 제소 파신 주고 냠내는 주고 받다 아니 빼셔고 다 견다 진시라.
So if you're only attacking without defending yourself, if you solely focus on attacking the enemy, it is possible that in a certain scenario, they will attack you back, and with your defenses being down, they might destroy you. So here, we need to develop those two-pronged approaches to fighting against the enemy. Particularly here, we do that in relation to the practice of the six perfections. So we need to be cautious. Particularly, we need to be cautious when we practice the six perfections. And how we do that? Well, let's look at it.
베나 담베나 간다 진소 파신 플레이야 주고 카딜이야 베나 다 진소 파신 플레이 주고 베나 짐비 냠내는 주고 슬랍시 짐비 냠내는 주고 슬랍시 안치 수름 송야당 아니 소바 공야라 소바야 아니 자원이네 비비 레마데바 짐바 동안 코란 토레 상담에나 안치 랑기 수름 냠발라 소바 아니 치 소바 냠발라 소바 가리나 아니 멘트 조피 네시그리스 짐바탕다 아니 수준송이 뭐 숨을 지는 조이나 그러 아니 짐바탕 땅고서 땅 송고서 송 조이나 아니 초반이 되세 그나 아니 디리차고서라서 인디고 그랬어.
So when you practice the conduct, the six perfections, you need to have these two together. So how will you do that? For example, with the practice of generosity. If you practice generosity in that with the intention to give, and you do not attend your mind at all to ethics, patience, and so forth, it might be that you will be solely invested in giving, and yet your ethical discipline will degenerate, or your patience will also degenerate. So a better way to practice generosity is to have an integration of generosity and ethics, generosity and patience, and so forth. So in order to do that, you need to make sure that you combine those two approaches into your practice of generosity.
아니 뭔가 쉬지 뭔가 qab지 아니 깽 가리는 체스거지 간지 딘디 마이바 아니 지 가서다 쇼탕체니베 아니 따투니지 아니 조바이나 그 가는 데는야 자 가는 데는야 아니 지 소소래야 내가 좀 맞도록 아 조토만 신지 그러 아니 퇴송 공수 야마트에 돈을 줘봐이나 아니 차당 모수 용수 줘봐게 아니 갑자기 잡도록 간지 뉴무 다 탐지 비게 아니 밤을 채투이지 윤거래스라
And similarly, if you meditate on bodhicitta, you focus on the observed object of bodhicitta and you develop those aspects to your mind that are the aspects of bodhicitta. But you do so without study and reflection, your wisdom will still be limited. In that, when you face certain adversities or difficulties, you will not be able to overcome them because your wisdom will be quite limited. So we want to develop an approach in which we are protected from all angles, from all directions. When we practice virtues, such as, for example, the virtue of bodhicitta, we want to make sure that from all angles, from all directions, we will not be susceptible to the harm of the afflictions. So without study, reflection, and meditation, we can still be harmed by the enemy of the afflictions to the point in which the enemy can ruin us. The enemy of the afflictions can ruin us without study, reflection, and meditation.
아니 나게기에 규수를 마토베게 아니 샘 둘이야야 아니 편도매바든지 차시고 살았어 간지 아니 간지 탑키고 싶던 안 조고도스.
Similarly, suppose that you study, you read text and so forth, but you do not apply it to meditation. If you following this way where you study but you don't apply it into your meditation, it is possible that certain afflictions, such as, for example, pride in thinking that I know it so well, will arise in your mind. And if pride arises, it would be of no help. Whatever you study will not really help you. So we need to be skillful in our approach to the Dhamma. We need to make sure that we integrate all those different aspects in order for the Dhamma to be beneficial to our mind. Okay. Have you got any questions?
First one was practicing each perfection skillfully. And the second one was study, reflection, and meditation.
So just to be clear, this two-pronged approach that we speak about here in relation to this section is to practice each one of the perfections, generosity and so forth, together with the other perfections. That's one. And the second is to study, reflect, and meditate. What is it? Yeah, to counteract the afflictions. Shazan kabdila de nidense de la chaniden de gogrese de kabdila chigdi tambodi ani chinso pachin tru rele la yang pachin rele nyamne chi suntu jewa chi nyamne chi cherwa de chi ani niba de tösan gom sum chene ani nyomon kaptuchea nyomon susun nyomon kaptuchea then the nigo grabes
Dindi mata thingi pena just page agores
no
can pena jimbatangi us lavche Tsultrim song tolaya samuche matawena kyunji chugures jimbatangi yobaina suzugi pi tembi sawa Tsultrim tolaya niver the song language pena sonjer kugas yang pi tösong gomsun la jabana ni töba chigi is lavche gom tolaya samuche matawena can töba chedi pi kasata new cholan drag ninga yores yang gom jagi is lavche töba machewaina 아니 저번에 거만 락다운 travel 자는 소나식 준비 테마도 했지. 어디라고 그랬어요?
저희는 10월에 직제들라 칼라들라 들라 자원은 근데 진짜로
10월 내게 직제에 진짜 뉴무 순내 맞지. 맨날 퇴바 치와이나 퇴바 짱짱 치와이나 나게 다투즈 내치니 뉴무 셈 tro드지. 퇴바 칸치 텐트 곰 자와이나 안 디기 뉴무 좀 퇴바 디기 셰라페 아니 셈라 펜칭 그랬어.
Well, not only that, in a sense that you can apply it in different ways. Like, for example, when you practice generosity, if you don't combine generosity with ethics, it might be that your ethical discipline will decline. Or if you practice generosity, but you don't supplement it with patience, again, it might be that you will be behaving in a faulty way. So you need to combine both generosity and ethics, which is the root of the Buddha's teaching. Or another way of applying the combination of the two is when you study, reflect, and meditate. If you only study, but you don't combine it with meditation, it might be that you'll become proud, and that will not be helpful. Or you might be thinking that I'm meditating, but you haven't done the study before, in that your meditation process is not based on knowledge, is not informed. Again, you'll not be able to have a really good or effective meditation practice. Looking at what Shantideva is saying here, particularly in the text, it says that when you put virtue into practice, you also need to protect your mind from the afflictions. If you don't protect your mind from the afflictions, then they might destroy you.
I wonder how to meditate on what I learned. Like, is it like an example? Say, if I want to read either a sentence and I build it up to a paragraph and build it up to a page, right?
If you want to, sorry.
If I wanted to meditate on what I'm reading,
Yeah.
like, for instance, you just read either a sentence, a paragraph, or a page, whatever you can retain.
Yeah.
And then you forcibly think about that as relating it to your life. And then when you sort of come to the conclusion of how it relates, then you just sit with that feeling and you don't forcibly think anymore. You know, just that whatever arises. Or is it you just read it and you just sit there silently and just see what arises? You know?
Okay. So I'll repeat part of your question just for the people at home that might not have had it. So you find it a little bit confusing or awkward in terms of how you apply to your meditation. Suppose that you read a sentence or a paragraph or a page, then should you read it and then contemplate it and then sit with it until something arises in your mind, or should you just kind of let it sink into your mind? Yeah. Dila Quran Tisco Tongidus, Dila Peshatewa Inarwa, Sikchi, Lowaina, Ani Yamana Shogdan, then the Chega, then the Lowaina, Shogdan Chaptan, then the Lowaina, Kandichi Chegore, Tusam Gonsum, Chaptan, then the Chewaina. Ani Tambo Lok. Dijala test samlo chikta. Ta gomse de la test takan de gogurbe dende samlo chik makopa do chik dagan de gogurbe kandichi chebo des.
내가 전주도 딱이 오면은 전주들이 전주 당부 전주 창상다 전주들이 그막 로데어 많이 봐 아니 디 탄다 가르치기 위해 디 가을 핑도 가을 누구도 Tinti is some of the tanchi, and ma, and agent for Kayam, and Tandalaya, and it Migum Chevana, Gomdas, a dingy sounded us, Drogo does that. Chigoni, and lawyer that, teaching which me, some of Madamena, and the Kanji Semlaya, Pendant Diggy Samaris, and showing Mosho Jiki, Loni, and Taras Hazaman, Matama given Chanza Malo, and Domadas, Kanji Chansamach.
So rather than limiting it to a sentence or a page and so forth, if, for example, we think of Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, so you study the whole manual from beginning to end. And as you do that, you also think about this text. What is beneficial? What is not beneficial? Now, which points are beneficial? Where is it not beneficial? So you think about it and reach a certain conclusion, and then you take it up into your meditation practice. So Geshe feels that that should be kind of the process of study, reflection, meditation, rather than limiting it to a sentence or a page or a paragraph. It sometimes can be awkward because if you then apply it only to one page without reading the whole text, the whole manuscript, it might be that you will not have enough knowledge to work with. And also to study, to read a text is not just to read through it, but also it is to think about the text as you read it, but also then to go deeper into thinking about it deeply. How is it beneficial to me? In what way is it beneficial? In what way it is harmful to certain things? So Geshe feels that this whole process should be viewed in terms of following a complete text rather than just parts of the text. So you're asking, sometimes you come across someone that experiences some mental disturbances, or I can say, certain conditions, mental illness, or what have you. You might not have the skills to help that person, but it's still kind of, if you try to talk to that person to kind of to deal with that person, it might be helpful to your mind in terms of the development of patience, right? Being in contact with that person might allow all sorts of afflictions to arise. So then you can use that for the practice of patience. Is that what you said? No. All right. Okay, so wasn't anything about patience. All right, sorry. I just didn't hear you well. Yeah. No, I think that probably I just misheard you. Yeah. Cool. All right, so now we're dealing with someone that kind of does have a lot of mental disturbances, and we don't have the skill, in that context, we don't have the skills to deal with them, and also different afflictions arise in the mind as we're doing so. So is it better for the time being just kind of to limit our contact with that person? Is it better to kind of set it aside for the time being? Sansa me sem natsa yoken sem chupa dia sokwa tudurwa. Kansa dina natsa dende roba
shegi devachi yanayan so top 시은 냠nen 내나 가래 지치고요 뭐 건설아 펜톡 칸에 록박 칸에 지치고요 하마 거바체 다야 컨트롤 제와 서베킹기 소소 녀먼들 숙체로 쳐도 저와이나 까딜라 칸데 지치나야 그래 스폰서라든데 저와치 근데 모토네 마소나야 그래 스네카가테스 relationa 그래 거래치네야 그래
당한도 마시 왕기 녀를 찾아봤어라. 마시 이제 갈 마시 니까가 저 디 장고에 제메데스라. 아, 파쇼마 아니 지금 계란 나가는 신기 이 생각도 좀 받지. 아니 시 마시야디 아니 수준 남주 만당 왕기 마디 남주 소르도 됐다. 당한주기 남주 중고 이 최근이거든 남주 중에는 선전 탐지기 편지에 소소 남주의 데마치에 마도나 선전 탐지기 편지 통인데 산지 코만 조고세디 낸 다가란 되기도 하더라.
We experience difficulties because of not knowing, not understanding. So also when we deal with someone that has a disturbed state of mind, we experience problems when we are not skillful, when we do not know what to do in that situation. So Geshe feels that a good way to approach that is to learn what we can do in those situations. And this is what we do in general with respect to a Dhamma attitude. We look at the areas in our life or in our mind where we lack knowledge, when we don't know enough, and we train in developing knowledge.
당한테 다치 시행이야 편도 지역이 타블론 약수지 아니 뭔가 깨우다면 사무소에서 전주장에 됐다 약수지래다스라 전주지 장바이나 아니 알담 펜슨 깨단 거는 적는다스라.
So the best way to train in benefiting others, as great masters of the past have indicated, is to train in Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life. Because when you take it up into your training, then you can see that it has this tremendous effect over your mind that is unparalleled to other ways of developing states in which you feel that you can use for the benefit of others. So this is a really useful text.
And championship creation challenge and me modern drawing is doing the can de the pendaselamandas ima control casa dora Philippi get chesajilia and Suzulo to one get chambon sounds down to one and she the Makashi is gun and examining the pinto to a kabushure that's right.
Like, for example, if you think of doing different things for the benefit of others, for example, doing some environmental work and so forth, then the only thing that you do in being an environmental activist is, for example, stopping people on the road or, roadblocks and so forth. And that's the only thing that you do without developing your mind. Well, the ability to benefit others would be still limited. So when you think about being able to benefit sentient beings by and large to a greater extent, then using such systems as Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life will provide you at the end with a better capacity to be of benefit to others. Thank you. So Jason, you might also have a question. Let's take it tomorrow. Will you be here tomorrow? Cool. So I'll put the dedication prayers on the screen. That's not dedication prayers, sorry. There it is. I can't remember what we used to do before. Do we used to do Only this? Janchu Samcho Rinpoche. Let's do this. Janchu Samcho Rinpoche, Magye Paman Ke Yuji, Yevanyam Pametai, Gone Gondu Pewa Shu. Let's keep it short. No.
操的是可以。
Yeah. Yeah. Should is it 3? Do we have a discussion at 2? Yeah, we do. Discussion at 2. Tutorial at 3.